Heavy clashes took place between the Sudanese army and the rapid support forces in north of Darfur State. The Sudanese army has conducted many airstrikes targeting RSF forces in North Darfur State and also north of the Kordofan. The Sudanese army airstrikes were mainly targeting RSF locations and centers, especially Zurich area, where the RSF biggest military area is situated. The Sudanese army, on the other hand, the rapid support forces has responded with anti-craft shells and missiles. Speaking about the humanitarian situation, um, yesterday Paris conference has pledged more than 2 billion euros in order to help the Sudanese people. However, the humanitarian gap is still huge. The UN Secretary called for more than 3.4 billion dollars in order to help those who are in need in Sudan. According to UN agencies, 25 million Sudanese people are in need of humanitarian assistance. 6 million of them are one step ahead from famine. So the humanitarian situation in Sudan is disastrous and it is still deteriorating. Here where I am in Port Sudan, by example, we have more than 112 displacement centers. Every displacement center shelters more than 400 person. So the humanitarian situation is difficult and the gap is also huge.
Well, we're not joined by Carl Schembri, Regional Media Advisor for East and Southern Africa at the Norwegian Refugee Council. Hi there, Carl. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Live. Carl, speak to us about the humanitarian situation from what you're hearing in Sudan.
Well, it's been 1 year of total neglect to this festering wound that has been allowed to unfold and get worse than in front of our eyes. The world has allowed this to happen, where we have the biggest humanitarian crisis on the planet happening in Sudan. You have millions of people trapped out of our reach, out of the reach of my colleagues who are trying to deliver aid. There are millions who are facing extreme starvation, dying of hunger as we speak, and at the same time, families, women, gang raped. Rape is being used as a weapon of war in certain parts of the country, executions, people who are being targeted for their ethnic affiliation, and all sorts of atrocities that children that are telling us they're witnessing. So from starvation to the fighting to the sprawling of this conflict and spilling over to the region. It's now well beyond Sudan, where you have 1.7 million people who have crossed into the neighboring countries, some of them some of the poorest on the planet. So it's a total milestone of shame that we've reached 1 year into this conflict, entering the second year when this has been allowed to happen by the regional powers, by countries with influence, countries that could have put a stop to this, could have protected the millions of civilians who have been killed, who are at risk on a daily basis. Thankfully, we are seeing some traction now. Yesterday's conference was a step in the right direction. We've heard the right words. We now need to see those words put into action. We need to see all the diplomatic influence exerted on both sides of this conflict, on the warring parties, and the funding that is essential to save lives. Yesterday, we saw half of the $4 billion needed promised at this conference. That means if that money materializes, there are still millions more still at risk. So we're still a long way away from any form of solution, let alone no solution in sight, but still we're hoping that the promises made yesterday will be followed up with urgency and immediacy, because it is about the lives of millions who are at stake.
So, Carl, I would like to ask you a little bit about, the money that has been pledged now. There's 2 billion euros for Sudan. Just in terms of, is it enough? And you've talked about the challenges of that. Even though there might be resources, it's difficult to get them to the places where people need it most. Just speak to us about how you see that playing out, and just in terms of the regional and international community, whether they failed Sudan and what needs to be done in your view.
Yes, it's been a shameful failure towards the people of Sudan, or the people, the civilians trapped there, and the host countries surrounding them, which are really struggling to do this. What we need after yesterday is, one, to see that funding made immediately available, because that is necessary to save lives. But we also need all the diplomatic pressure put on the parties to this conflict to make sure that aid right now. There are millions out of our reach. There are all sorts of obstacles along the way that make aid impossible to reach them, and we need those obstacles lifted as soon as possible. So we need the funding part to be provided as soon as possible, but we need the diplomatic front to take over as well and make sure that my colleagues can reach all those who need the aid as soon as possible, because it's been a year where things have just gotten worse on a day-to-day basis, and we have a looming famine staring us in the face. People are already dying of hunger, and it's going to just get worse if aid doesn't reach them.